Yo soy Wendelle Stevens, Teniente Coronel de la Fuerza Aérea de los Estados Unidos. I'm Wendell Stevens, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. When I came back from the war, I was assigned to Wright Field as a test pilot in the Air Technical Intelligence Center. And my additional duty was sorting classified documents captured from the former enemy factories in Europe. Estamos buscando evidencias de avances tecnológicos. Y cuando venía tiempo cambiar mi posición, me manda a Alaska, donde se encuentra un trabajo. Oh, and there in the Air Technical Intelligence Center, I came up for a normal rotational reassignment overseas. And when it came, it was an assignment to Alaska. That was a province of the United States at the time. And there, my job was to supervise a team of civilians that were installing special equipment aboard the B-29s to look for this anomalous aerial phenomena, se llaman. Today we call them UFOs. And we didn't see them every night, but we launched a mission every night, and maybe 2 or 3 times a month we would have an encounter over the Arctic. And one of those encounters, a brilliant, pulsing, pinkish-orange object was approaching rapidly from in front of the B-29, stopped. He took up the speed of the B-29 inmediatamente por unos 3 o 4 minutos. They captured evidence in those other cameras, and radiation detectors, electronic detectors, heat detectors, magnetic detectors. There was evidence on many of the special equipment items that we installed aboard. And every time we had an encounter, it was flown directly to Washington, D.C. that night by courier. I never got to see any of this, but it was very interesting because another case, the B-29 came on a 200-foot diameter disc sitting on the Arctic Ocean that submerged and disappeared under the water. Another time, they came on one on the water that took off and flew away ahead of the B-29. So these were very interesting phenomena. At that time, I had no idea that anybody had technologies like this. And I was convinced that they were extraterrestrial. My superiors did not agree with me. They thought that they might be Earth-made objects that they were needed to study. And I didn't understand until many years later that the Nazis during World War II actually developed flying discs that could go underwater. And one of those disc research facilities was captured by the Russians before they were able to evacuate it, take it away. The Russians captured it complete with all the engineers and the workers and took it to Upper Siberia where it continued the German developments. And today I'm ready to accept the possibility that those 200-foot diameter discs that were sitting on the water and disappeared underneath could be German. Could be German developments from the Nazi programs in World War II. And when they were floating on the water, took off and flew away, that was also a possibility for the German discs. Another one that came on sitting on the ice pack. And when it took off and flew away, it left nothing behind it. No marks in the snow, no colors, no stains, nothing. When we launched the B-29 on these missions, it left a sea of equipment around the B-29, stains, they made many colors in the snow and ice that clearly indicated that we had done something there. So this was also a unique phenomenon. And today, I am prepared to accept the possibility that what we were viewing and photographing in the Arctic were further developments of the Nazi research program on discs that disappeared when the war ended. Everything disappeared except for what the Russians captured. One of the research facilities complete and took it to Upper Siberia to a place that we call the Taimyr Peninsula, where they continued their developments of a craft that could fly underwater. And so we may have been, my superiors may have been correct, that we were trying to find out more about what the Russians had captured, and that I was wrong. They were not extraterrestrial at that time. So I'm prepared to accept both hypotheses. They could have been extraterrestrial now, and they could have been Russian developments of the German Nazi disc program. And in that position, I was very interested in this new phenomena because my job, my business was aerotechnical research, and I desperately wanted to know more about these vehicles that could take off vertically and descend vertically. And I tried to take some pictures home one time, and my superiors caught me. And they said, no, you can't do that. This belongs to the government. Whatever you encounter on your own, you can investigate and keep for yourself. But whatever you do on business hours for the government belongs to the government, and you can't have any of that. So I began taking the leads in the government reports and going to those families, those witnesses personally, and beginning my own investigation of their case, which usually continued afterwards. And so I was getting more information in the cases that the government was collecting because I was following up on it. And that began my UFO research, which continued for 50-some years until today, 60 years. So taking those leads, I used to try to collect copies of the same photographs that the government was getting. And I was able to buy copies at first. Then I was able to exchange copies that I had purchased with others that had copies, until I reached the point where I had enough photos I could exchange collections for collections. And then I began to collect photos by collections, and the number of photos grew rapidly until I have over 4,000 photos of UFOs in my files today. And so as I was doing these investigations of my own, I encountered some cases, more than one case of contact that appeared to be coming from a group of stars that our astronomers call the Pleiades. And the first one of those cases began up in Minnesota in 1958. And then there were two others that I investigated of visitors, human beings just like us, who say they came from the Pleiades. And so I began to study the Pleiades phenomena. Then when I heard of a case that was happening in Switzerland where they were getting exceptional photographs, I had to go investigate that on my own time and my own expense. And I discovered a man that was taking superb photographs of flying discs in Switzerland. And he immediately told me that they were posing their craft for him to get good pictures, so that his government would examine the pictures, find out that they would be impossible to fake them, and want to know what they had to say. And those visitors from the Pleiades said that they had a very important message for our world, that we were destroying our ionosphere with some industrial gases that rose slowly to the ionosphere, combined with one ion, and it came back, and carrying away the ionosphere, and that up to that time we had lost 6% of our ionosphere, and they wanted him to communicate the message to his government, a neutral power between two Cold War powers, that we were destroying our planet and we must stop. They also told him that these heavy gases, some of them took 10 years to rise to the ionosphere and then descend back again. And they said if we stopped all production of these heavy industrial gases at that moment, the destruction would continue for another 10 years and we would lose 16% of our ionosphere. We didn't respond to this at all. Nobody did anything for another 5 years. And so the last word Billy had is that the mutation has already begun. It's irreversible. The ionosphere is so badly deteriorated now that we are being changed by the cosmic rays that are coming through without filtering by the ionosphere. I went to Switzerland on my own expense, buying airline tickets, and I found a very simple man, a farmer, with only one arm, a broken camera, taking these beautiful pictures with a camera that had been dropped and the focus adjustment couldn't be changed. The shutter speed was a fixed shutter speed, 1/35 of a second. It was a very poor camera for such beautiful pictures. And nobody else with cameras with such poor capability ever got pictures as beautiful as those. Well, I discovered early on that there are many cases of contact by extraterrestrials who seem to be human beings just like us, also other types of creatures similar to human beings, that there was such a variety of cases and so many of them that it deserved attention. It meant that we were being observed by other intelligent societies far more advanced than we were. They could come here and go back. We can't leave the planet yet. So this represented a level of intelligence far beyond where we are now and potentials for us to grow to. We still can't get off the planet, but I'm studying cases where the visitors come from distant planets and other solar systems and then return. And I'm convinced that these beings are not Earth beings visiting us from elsewhere on the planet, that their morphology is different, their faces, different ears, different nose, different eyes, different mouth, different stature, different build. And so there's a great variety of such intelligent creatures visiting this planet and leaving, going back to their home planets. And so apart from the Earth developments, the successful developments discovered by the Germans, there are other visitors here also, very many of them. And so I began to focus on the different cultures of intelligent beings that were coming to this planet, and there are literally thousands, not a few, not dozens, not hundreds. There are thousands, maybe even millions of different intelligent creatures visiting this planet. Some research that was done in 1979 by Mufos in the United States and Kuforn in Canada discovered that Earth was being visited on a frequency of 70,000 events per year all over the surface of the planet. And that this amount of visitation certainly was something to take into account, to become interested in. And what I'm investigating is a few of these 70,000 events. But what I'm discovering over 60 years of research is that there is a vast amount of intelligent life besides our own here on this planet. They're coming from everywhere in our galaxy and even other galaxies to this planet to examine us because we have not left the planet yet, and they're wondering whether we're going to be able to escape in time to survive as a species. And they are able to come and go. So they indicate that we are laggard, we're slow in our development. We should have reached a stage in technological evolution where we could begin to leave the planet by now, and we still are not able to do so. So we've become a laboratory experiment. We're the rats in the laboratory that are being studied to see if we're going to succeed in escaping the planet before it's too late. And the predictions are that we probably will not. We'll probably perish with the planet because we're too slow. Well, I think that the Pleiades case taking place in Switzerland was the most important because it had the most technical evidence that we could study. We had hard objects, we had metal specimens, we had hair samples, we had crystals, we had ceramics, we had plastics from another society, and we can analyze those. We can learn a lot from those objects that can be studied. And so that case became very interesting to me, and I continued going back to Switzerland over and over for more than 11 or 12 times, visiting and staying a week to 2 weeks in the household with Meyer every time I went there. And I even saw events happening around him. I did not see the craft, but others that were with me did see the craft there, friends of mine. Yes. I was being closely watched in what I was doing for a long time. I discovered that I had several pickups, several microphones in my house. That they were listening to everything I was saying and doing in my home for many years. And I had a friend whose business was detecting bugging devices, and he'd come down and we'd find the bugs and we'd remove them from the telephone lines or so forth, and he'd keep them. We notified, one of them was made by AT&T, and it had AT&T part numbers on it. And he called AT&T and told them we had their device. And government agents came to him, took the device, and told him he could go to prison for moving objects. This was a tap in my line, for removing the object from my line. And we found another one later in a different place. The next one we found out in the box on the street. We removed that, and then we found one up on the telephone pole where it goes from there into the box on the street. We removed that, and each time government agents would come to my friend's house and threaten him with prison if he touched such objects again. So I believe that there were more in my house than we found, because they always knew who I was talking to and what I was saying. Sometimes my conversations were played back to me over my telephone when they were warning me not to do this or not to do that. They told me to stop my activities, to stop looking for UFOs, that it's none of my business, that I should stop immediately and forget the whole thing. And I was even picked up twice by intelligence agents and taken to an intelligence post where they grilled me. They questioned me for hours. And I finally came to a conclusion that I'm not going to get out of there until I agree to whatever they wanted me to agree to, which was to give up UFO research. And I would agree to give it up, and then I'd be quiet for a month and then go back into activity. And a year later, they came back again and picked me up once more, took me to a debriefing point. The office they took me to was a very strange office. One of them was in Tucson, and when they drove me down in a white car to a popular street in Tucson. They turned the corner and pulled up in front of a building like a government barracks building. It was a wooden building with small offices on the ground floor. They took me up the fire escape on the back, unlocked the door and put me in, took me down a hallway 2 doors to the left, unlocked another door and put me in. There's only a desk in this room, no pictures on the walls, a desk and a telephone, 3 chairs, one behind, one on the side, one in front. They put me in front. One agent took a seat over here and the other one behind the desk. And again, they argued and they threatened and they pounded the desk and yelled at me, insisting that I am causing problems that I have no business causing and that I could lose my retirement pay and a lot of things. They never went that far, but they did scare me a few times. And I tried to follow their rules for a long time, and I guess I'm probably busting them a little bit by telling you all of this now. Well, at this point, I'm ready to conclude. I've been doing this for 65 years. I'm 85 years old. And I think that at my age now, 85 years old, and with 65 years of investigation behind me, I'm ready to conclude that we are being observed by alien extraterrestrial intelligence because we are slow in leaving the planet. And I think because of the amount of visitation and the evidence from many of them that they live in great motherships that travel space forever, that planets are something like nests for birds, that humanity, when a planet is ready for life, humanity is brought here, it matures on the planet, and when it produces a rational consciousness, intelligence, and technologies, it builds escape vehicles and leaves the planet before the planet perishes. We're at the end of a cycle. Our planet is getting ready, is about to perish here. Everything is running out. Water is running out, land is running out, everything. And so we are at a point where we are being forced to leave the planet, and we have not developed the technology to do so. I believe that many of our visitors live forever on manufactured vehicles that cruise space forever. And because so many of the intelligent visitors are different from each other, they all seem to be different from all the others. In 115 cases that I examined in great detail that lasted for years, each one, all of those were different from each other except for 2. 2 of the 115 cases came from the same place, Reticulum. All the rest were from different places, had different ships, different technologies, doing different things, completely different from all the others. And I believe at this point that this is another example of the infinity of the Creator, that it's like no two leaves the same on a tree, no two snowflakes the same, no two grains of sand the same. It's an example of the infinity of life and creation and being. And there are no two alike. Of all the visitors to this planet, of the 70,000 per year, there are no two exactly alike. No two planets alike and no two solar systems alike. I think that the contactee phenomena is an awakening of some kind. It's an attempt to alert us to the fact that we must progress, that we have to give up our conflict with each other, give up the wars and destruction, and begin working on escape vehicles before it's too late. That if we don't do this soon, we are not going to be able to escape the planet and we'll perish with it. I don't know how I can be helped by anybody else. All of my help is frustrated usually by government activities of one kind or another, so I work alone. There are many people doing the same thing, and many others have come to similar conclusions that we must progress, we must get off the planet before we run out of drinkable water and land that will grow crops and things like that. We're reaching a point where if we take what we know for the last 100 years and extend that 500 years, we find that the planet will be inhospitable to us. We have to leave it. And we're not ready at all yet. We're not even getting close. Okay. Well, the question is why don't our astronauts, if they have seen anything, why don't they say something about it? And in my conversations with the few that I have met, they all have seen something strange that they couldn't explain. Their communications were changed to another frequency when this happened, and all the information was collected on discrete frequencies so that the public would know nothing about it. They're all warned not to discuss this in public, and they have good retirement salaries, pays, that can be taken away if they break the rules. And so none of them have really decided to break the rules. Gordon Cooper tried for a time, and he got a lot of problems from it. I think that they have all seen something unusual, which tells us that somebody else is watching our progress and hoping we can proceed sufficiently in our technological advancement to escape the planet in time to survive as a species. And there are arguments that every species, since everyone is different from all the others, they're all an important part of the creation, what the Pleiadians call the creation. It's an impersonal, unpersonified creator. Yes, the aliens have signaled their presence for various reasons by causing mass blackouts in various cities. New York had one that was caused by alien extraterrestrial interference in a relay system in upper New York that caused a blackout that darkened the city for days. It's happened in Buenos Aires, it's happened in Rio de Janeiro, it's happened in many other cities, and these are signals that we should make progress in what we're doing, because a time is coming when it will be too late. And I believe that these blackouts are caused deliberately to produce confusion here and cause us to do some research and study and find out where we are and what we're doing. There are evidences that alien visitors have taken water. We've had them take whole swimming pools full of water. We've had to take water out of city water reservoirs, large, vast amounts of water. We know that they must be analyzing the water to see where we are and how long it's going to last us and how long we can use it, and a lot of things that indicate their interest in our potential survival as a species and gaining an ability to leave the planet in time. Yeah. What do I think of the alien vehicles extracting power from electric lines? There are many reports of alien vehicles hovering over power lines and even extending rods to extract power from the lines. And I have some cases that I have investigated. They tell me that the amount of power extracted from the line in a short amount of time is enough so that it overloads the power system and even sometimes causes blackouts. that they can take a vast amount of power in a very short time from a power line. The question is there evidence that any of the aliens are preparing another place for us to be evacuated to in case we cannot produce the technology and escape the planet ourselves? And there are at least a dozen other visitors here who claim that they have prepared another planet with a suitable habitation, suitable atmosphere for Earth people to survive, and that some of those have evacuation vehicles stationed near Earth in space. One of them has at least 6 that can carry 1 million people each in an evacuation program to take survivors to this other hospitable planet. And so there seems to be a concerted effort to do so if we do not manage to escape the planet before it dies. I have a lot of problems with that. There was 2001, or the change of the millennium, that all electrical systems were supposed to fail. Our electronic notebooks wouldn't work, none of that ever happened. And I am told by various aliens that the Earth changes that come on cycle, where we get changes of geography, of topography. We get land that submerges and land that emerges from the oceans. And they said various extraterrestrial visitors have told us that those movements of the tectonic plates that take place on cycle have already begun. And we're beginning to feel the effects of them in our extremes of weather that we're sensing now. More floods, more droughts, more snow, but no snow. We're seeing, we're told that there are areas, for instance, of the United States, the northwest part of the United States is going to become a desert area because the jet stream is being shifted south by we're being told by the extraterrestrials that our weather patterns are changing as a result of the beginning movement of these tectonic plates, and that the northwest part of the United States will become a desert, and that the desert part around Tucson would become subtropical. It's beginning to change. We're beginning to see more rains. We're beginning to see the desert turning green. I think that they're beginning to see droughts in the northwest. But all of these are calculatable because of the predicted shift in the atomic plates. We know that the western part of the United States is going to submerge. It's going to subduct under the continental plate. We know that the continental plate is going to crack in the middle because of this, and will produce water in the central part of the United States, ocean water. We know that there's land that's going to emerge in the Pacific and maybe more in the Atlantic as a result of the shifting of the plates. That has already begun. And it will take a few hundred years for it to complete its action, but there will be great changes and movements in society as this progresses. Okay, what do I believe in God at this point after talking to extraterrestrial visitors for a long time who do not have the same God? They don't have a personified God. As a matter of fact, I made a list of 20 points in common, and one of those is that they do not have a personal God. They all see something impersonal and universal that the Palladians call it the creation. And the creation is the result of all that is manifest and unmanifest. And all that is manifest and unmanifest in sum is the creation itself. That it's a force that grows continually, that is not personal in any sense. The Palladians tell Billy Meyer that we all have our contact with the creation internally. We do not need intercessors. We don't need priests. We don't need ministers. We don't need anybody, any intercessor, anybody between us and the creation. That everybody can make contact with the creation directly, and that because of our direct contact with creation, everybody can cure himself of all of his ailments if he understands the creation. Yes, the question is, am I familiar with any planet visitors that are aware of the devas, the gods of the Hindus? You know, 8,000 years ago, India was being visited by visitors from the stars, flying what they call vimanas. And there were so many different vimanas, visiting India at the time that they classified them with bird names like pheasant vimanas, duck vimanas, goose vimanas, parrot vimanas. And there was even a time when the king of India was carried in a vimana to observe his armies in battle in the field between his armies and the armies of Ceylon. And so the Earth has been visited by extraterrestrials way back in our most ancient history. They've been observing us.
For you, is the same extraterrestrial than angels?
Are one and the same.
Oh.
Okay, the question. And so at this point, I'm prepared to conclude that extraterrestrials and the beings that we call angels are one and the same phenomena, that in different form. Because of the variety of visitors, and they're all different from each other, we have the solid, palpable creatures like us, and we also have less palpable creatures like angels from everywhere in the created universe. And the created universe is vast. It's not just our galaxy or our system of galaxies. There are literally millions of galaxies having billions of planets in each one, and there's life everywhere. I think the Catholic Church has been aware of the UFO phenomena for a long time. I'm told that now, and we're trying to get some verification of this, that when President Eisenhower was visited by extraterrestrials in Merak Air Base way back in 1953, that by the second day of the visitation, he decided he should share this with senior church members. So he sent word down to the Bishop of Los Angeles, Bishop McIntyre, invited him to join the meetings with the extraterrestrials in a hangar in Merak Air Base. Bishop McIntyre was flown up to Merak, joined the meetings, and sat as an observer and listening to the discussion that was taking place. And when the meetings were over and our security people tried to swear everybody to secrecy, Bishop McIntyre says, I can't take but one oath, and I've already taken it. That's to God. I don't take any more oaths. So they said, well, can you promise not to reveal what you have witnessed here? And he said, I can't even promise that. My compact is with God. So they said, well, please don't say anything about this. It's not good for the public to know. But he went back to Los Angeles, packed his bags, bought a ticket, and went right to the Vatican and reported the whole thing to Pope Pius XII. The Pope Pius XII, and after that meeting, created a new entity in the Vatican called the SIV, Società Italiana Vaticano, to investigate the UFO phenomena. They already have Bishop McIntyre's report, and they have been collecting information ever since, and I think they probably have the biggest collection of valid information in the world, in the Vatican, in the SIV, and they're just not sharing it with us. My information, I began researching the Nazi Kugelblitz program that began way back when Hitler was coming to power in 1938. And there was a time when, after World War I, when the German factories were destroyed, and we went in with aid programs and rebuilt new factories and new production lines and facilities. At that time, there were many German engineers out of work, and they had gone to university and colleges to learn. They were trying to find the underlying forces behind the physical forces that we work with in our technologies. And they began to get answers in the metaphysical library in the University of Vienna. There they found two women that were doing the same kind of research, and one of them had become a voice channel and the other was the moderator. So the German engineers began asking questions of the voice channel and getting sensible answers that they could verify in the metaphysical literature. So they began to concentrate on these communications with this extraterrestrial intelligence and wanted a closer contact. And eventually a meeting was arranged, and representatives of those extraterrestrial society met with German engineers, and a relationship developed. It so happened that those extraterrestrials had been observing Earth for some time, and they observed that we are a particularly belligerent society. We're always at war with somebody. And they thought it was because our societies were not mixing very well, that only the rich people the affluent people could buy a ticket to ride on an airliner or a ship. And they thought if more people could travel and become familiar with each other, that there would be less hostility. And so they proposed, they had an idea that they offered to the German engineers. They proposed to help the German engineers build a transport to carry 200 to 300 people that could rise vertically and descend vertically, didn't need an infrastructure 35 miles out of town and railroads connecting, wouldn't carry any fuel, wouldn't require any fuel, operate on free energy, that everybody could travel because they could all afford a ticket. And so they began helping the German engineers to build such a vehicle. So those extraterrestrials began guiding the German engineers in the design and development of such a vehicle to carry passengers very economically on our planet. And they helped the German engineers design the first operational or the first workable programs. They were 100-foot diameter disc, the experimental disc that could carry a number of people, and that they could rise and descend vertically. They were true extraterrestrial, true UFOs, true flying discs. And the Germans in their research program came to a point where they inverted a tank turret, a Panzer tank turret on the bottom of one and fired it. At that point, the extraterrestrials thought, oh, we're only giving them a bigger and better weapon, there'll be more bigger wars, and they sabotaged the program and left. But the German engineers eventually worked around this program and succeeded in building flying discs also, and then the visitors came back. The visitors were coming from a planet, the third planet out in a solar system that we call Aldebaran. And the Aldebarans were very interested in our society surviving as a species to join the community of interplanetary nations. The Germans, for their part, were looking for the origin of the true Aryan race, what they called the true Aryan race. And they were able to trace it back to Mesopotamia, to the country that Sitchin wrote about, Sumeria. And they couldn't get beyond Sumeria looking for the origin of the Aryan race. When they began working with the Aldebarans, and the Aldebarans began helping them design a vehicle to go to Aldebaran, and the Aldebarans seemed to indicate that they had planted a colony of Aldebarans on this planet that grew and became a society, an advanced society. The Germans eventually connected this, that the Sumerians may have been the colony put on this planet by the Aldebarans. And when eventually some German engineers were taken to the home planet, they landed, they were greeted by the people that lived there. They were told that they landed in a continent on the home planet called Sumer. Now, isn't that interesting? We don't know where the name for Sumeria came from, but the people that colonized the Sumeria, the Sumerians, apparently came from a continent on the home planet called Sumer. And that's very interesting. It's an interesting play on words. The question is, are we developing some technologies by observing the technology that comes into our hands from UFOs? And of course, we have a number of crashed UFOs in the United States. Other countries have, the Russians have crashed UFOs, the Chinese have crashed UFOs. And when I was on a program in Mexico City, a marathon program that lasted 4 hours, I had been in contact with a group of Chinese research scientists studying the UFO phenomena in China when the bamboo curtain was down and there was nothing going in and nothing coming out. And when we were on this 4-hour marathon program on Mexican TV, and a new Chinese commercial attaché had arrived in town, and when his television set was carried into his new apartment and plugged into the wall, the program he got was the marathon program on Mexican TV on UFOs. And he saw me for the first time. I had been exchanging letters with him and sending him photographs for their handwritten journals in China. So he called the Mexican television station and said, "Can you bring Mr. Stevens down? I'd like to meet him." And we went down there the next day, and we're in his office. They locked the door, they served tea, and I'm trying to start the conversation. So I say, "Sun Shi Li, can you tell me if your government has crashed UFOs? He says, of course. And I said, I started to say, what are you doing with them? And he interrupted me and he said, but of course we're not doing the same thing with them that you are. We're all back engineering. But he said, you're back in engineering to develop technologies to use for military purposes. He said, we're back engineering to design the airliners of the future. And he goes back to the same thing that the Aldebarans would work in. He says, we want to build a commercial airliner that will carry 200 to 300 people, rise and descend vertically, and carry no fuel. Well, that's exactly what the Aldebarans had in mind. So now the Chinese think that if they can produce such a vehicle, they can sell the airliners for the world from China. And can you imagine what would happen to the economical conditions of the world if the Chinese were able to produce the airliners, which is really one of the key elements of the economic base of the United States. We build the airliners for everybody. If the Chinese were doing that, the whole economic system of the world would shift overnight. And so I said, have you had any success with this? And he says, yes. He says, our back engineering has produced operational small test vehicles that can rise and descend vertically. And he says, we're working on a bigger program to build the airliners of the future. And I thought that was very interesting. He's coming from the commercial attaché from China to Mexico.
Wow.
That was important about that meeting we had that time down.
So she told me something, but never this kind of detailed things.
Yeah.
How old are you?
85.
What is the secret?
Live a day at a time and don't live for the future. You can waste all your time living for the future and really never get there. You only have one day. Yesterday's gone, tomorrow's not here. If you live one day at a time and do everything you want to do in that day for that day, you don't get old. Most people at age 60 begin to think, I'm getting old, I'm slowing down. So they begin to get old and slow down. You don't have to do that. You're programming yourself to die in a few years. You don't need to do that.
You practice any kind of sport?
No, I just do what I want to for one day at a time, only living today.
Yes.
And this is it. This is all I have. Yesterday's gone, tomorrow's not here. And I'm enjoying the day. It's great.
The food?
I eat anything I want to. And I'm convinced at this point, at 85 years old, I'm convinced that the body tells you what you need.
Yes.
If you're hungry for something, eat it. If you're not hungry for it, don't eat. Don't eat something just to be wasting time or something to pass time. You get fat. Eat what you need, your body will tell you, and no more.
Wendelle,
Giants in the earth, yes. In Ecuador, they have a system of cave called the Caves de los Tayos. The Tayos are a black bird that lives underground in caves. And these caverns are vast caverns. They're huge caverns. And there are apartments carved off the tunnels on both sides. And those apartments looked like they were made for beings who were 7 meters tall. The seats carved into the wall. When I sat on them, my legs are way off the floor. The beings that sat on those chairs and the beds they slept on were for 21-foot tall beings, 7 meters tall. So way back, 8 kilometers back in the caves, they found a skeleton of one of these beings, and the femur was a huge femur, and the doctors concluded that those belonged to a creature that was, at one time, was close to 7 meters tall. Jaime had what he called a tooth from one of the giants that he gave me. And I don't know where he got it, but I took it back to the States to have it forensically analyzed, and they quickly identified it as a mammoth tooth. It was big. It looked like a human tooth. It was a mammoth molar. And they showed me that mammoths lived in South America a long time ago, in prehistoric South America, in that region. So that was not from the giant. But there's a priest in Loja, I think it is, in Ecuador, that has bones from the giant taken from the cave that are huge leg bones and huge fragments that nobody seems to be interested in them because he said there's no such thing as a 20-foot tall human being. But there were 7-meter beings. When I look back in the annals of the conquistadors, one of the conquistadors married an Inca woman, and their son, became interested in preserving the society of the Incas. The Incas didn't have a written form, but the son learned to write English from the Jesuit priests with the conquistadors, and he began writing down the history of the Incas. And he was writing from the word-of-mouth history, but in those annals of the history of the Incas, there's a whole chapter devoted to the giants that came ashore in northern Peru and went up into Ecuador that were 7 meters tall. Each one ate the food of 50 men of the people who lived in Peru. And so the Peruvians started desperately to kill them off because they were eating all the food. And they eventually drove them off. They left the coast and went into the jungle, which may have been how they got in the caves in the mountains of Ecuador. But they arrived in huge balsas that were built by the giants that came in from the Pacific, and they landed on the north coast of Peru. And there's a written history of the progress of those giants until they were driven into the jungles to the east from there and disappeared. So there is a history that shows, that backs up the story of the 7-meter giants in Ecuador. They may have been survivors of that expedition that arrived from somewhere in huge balsa boats on the north coast of Peru. There is a history. Why do the governments hide the phenomena? I was told when I was helping them collect information that it was a national security matter in this sense. Everybody has crashed vehicles. We're all back engineering from the crash residue trying to build something like that. And none of us have all the pieces to the puzzle. Our puzzle is still unfinished. So no government wants to release any bit of information to any other government because it might be the piece that helps close part of the puzzle. And so we protect what we've got so they don't get it. We want what they have, whatever we can get, so we can see what we can do to our puzzle. And in that sense, it's a national security matter because the one who closes his puzzle first will dominate the world. And nobody wants the other one to do it. We don't want the Russians to do it. The Russians don't want the Chinese don't want us. So we all guard all the information we have as closely as the government can manage to keep others from learning a little bit more about the phenomena that might help them. I think the powers behind all of this may be interesting. It's the money people that finance all governments, the ones that create and stop wars. They decide who the winner of a war is going to be when they create the war in the first place. They make money on both sides. They're the ones that are really governing the planet, and they make and break governments on the planet. They tell the people that are in contact with them that they already have contact with extraterrestrials, that they have a base on the moon that they can go to and come back, that their contacts with their extraterrestrials are friendly, that their extraterrestrials want to see this planet grow and create the escape vehicles in time to survive the planet, that the planets have shorter lifespans than species, and that if we don't leave the planet in time, we're going to die with it, that they don't want to die with it any more than anybody else. So they are interested in our progress as well as the extraterrestrials are, and they're working together to try to bring our economies where right now they're trying to get a one world government, and there are many facets to this. One was unifying Europe, another one is unifying North and South America. A step is the American Union that is being discussed now, where Mexico, Canada, and the United States are going to be unified. That's another step. Then South America will be unified. China is being unified. They'll control the whole Orient. And at some point they're brought together where we create a one world government, not the United Nations, because nobody accepts them as speaker for the world. We will eventually produce a one world government that will then, the aliens will help us guide us in building our escape vehicles and joining the community of intelligent planets freely cruising in space. Other species types that have already left their planets and are freely traveling in space now. And they want us to join them also, because in this infinity of creation again, the Earth species is a uniquely special creation that exists nowhere else in all of creation, and the loss of any part of creation is a loss to the creation itself, and it doesn't want to do that. So the impetus is for this species to survive and become space life like all the others at some point in the future. I think the younger generation should collect information, pay attention to what's happening. There are physical events that come on cycle that change the face of the planet here. Life will survive because it doesn't happen overnight. It's a progressive process that allows those who choose to move to make the move. Those who choose to stay with their homes and not leave will perish with their homes. But they don't really, all they lose is the physical body. The spiritual impetus here continues. And life on this planet is a spiritual life to begin with. The physical experiences are only a part of it. And so the impetus is for the life intelligence to survive. And we should all be aware that we are an increment of that. We're all cells in the body of the greater intelligence that makes up this planet. There's an intelligence for a city, for a family, for a city, for a continent, for a planet, and even bigger for solar systems. And we're part of that scale of intelligence.
Do you believe in reincarnation?
I believe, yes. I am convinced that reincarnation, that a physical incarnation is only a day in school. Yeah, you know, my last physical incarnation, I'm aware of what it was. I was the son of an Englishman that created a boys' school in Marblehead, Massachusetts. And the British were governing the early United States at the time, and General Howe was the governor of our area there. When my father died, I inherited the boys' school. And my school was being paid by the British government, and General Howe, they represented law and order and safety. And the revolutionists were the hippies of the day that represented disruption and chaos. So I was using the boys in the boys' school as spies to find out what the revolutionists were doing and reporting to General Howe. I was caught and hung by the revolutionists at that time. And my body is buried in Marblehead, Massachusetts, named Wilfred Brown. Yes, very simple.
How did you get aware of this?
By several means. At one time I was studying reincarnation. I began looking at my past histories and collecting them. One time I began making a list of them, thinking if two incarnations fell on top of each other, they would kill the whole idea there's no such thing. Now I'm prepared to accept the fact that wouldn't necessarily cancel the reincarnation program. I believe that the oversoul that this body is experiencing can have another extension into physical materiality over here, and maybe another one there, female body, a male body, all living at the same time, unaware of each other, but all contributing knowledge to the oversoul that continues to grow. And it has incarnations that last for a time, and it withdraws them, extends again for a time, and continues to do this as this oversoul progresses. And the oversoul is always growing, becoming a part of a greater collective above that. I've been interested in Pedro Ramniak for a long time. He's an old man. He was an early researcher, one of the earlier researchers. He was also a direct contactee of the Umites, human beings who come from a planet they call Umo, were making direct contact with Pedro Ramniak down here. Primarily their contacts were with Spanish scientists in Spain, as the information came out from there. But we knew that the Umites, after they discovered Earth and began studying the planet, they eventually created 18 different study groups, study locations in 18 different countries on this planet, including rare countries like Zimbabwe was one, Denmark was one, Yugoslavia was one, Western Australia was one. There was one in Bolivia, in Oruro, Bolivia. There was one in Argentina down here, where the Umites were making contact. Pedro Ramniak was one of those. There were others in Canada and even in China that the Umites were studying. And once the Umites learned the first language, which was French, and then moved to the Pyrenees and learned Spanish, with their technology they could learn other languages rapidly in only a matter of hours. And they began to teach earth sciences in their schools on Umo and preparing expeditionaries to come to Umo to work in these missions that were studying Earth society. Because of the extreme variety in life and species on this planet caused by our short lifespans, we have the shortest lifespan in this part of the universe, of our universe, about 1/10 of what's normal. 1,000 years is a normal lifespan for progressing humanity. Ours is less than 100. And so we become the laboratory rats. We're a laboratory condition that can be studied in a short amount of time here. And so species come from everywhere to watch our evolution because of our restricted lifespans. Well, let's see, where was I going with this? I was trying to explain something. Anyway, so because it was reincarnation. So when I began doing the research, I was prepared to give it all up if I found two. Now I'm not convinced that that's necessary, that there can be other simultaneous incarnations, even in, it could be a male body here and a female body over there with children and something else over here in different countries simultaneously. And so I believe that incarnation is the oversoul extending itself into physical materiality to gather experience for that oversoul, and that there's another stage above that where a bigger collective gathers from more oversouls. And it's a constant pyramid to eventually arriving at the creation itself, which is universal. It includes all life of all kinds. And so in some sense, we are related to all the life on this planet. We're related to the animal life and to everything else. And when we needlessly kill an animal, we are like cutting off a little finger. We're going to lose some of our potential by destroying that life form that is gathering experience as well for the planetary soul, or the planetary consciousness. You know, Olga mentioned something about the Hindu philosophy. When I was living on Taiwan, there was a Buddhist temple down the hill from my house. And my young daughters were going down there and talking to a Buddhist priest. And I said, how do you talk to him? And they said, oh, he speaks English. So I went down there with him and I met him, and they were, the people around me, Americans were telling me that the Buddhists had 24 gods. So when I got in the temple foyer, there was 24 statues in different colored robes with different colored faces. One had eyebrows that grew to his navel, and different things. One had a white face, one had a red face, another a black face, and another a flesh face. And so I asked the priest why they need all these gods. He said, they're not gods. He says, those are images. They represent virtues and vices. They remind us of our virtues and vices. He said, we have one God, and he is not image. He's too grand and too great to be put in image form. But he said, he's speaking of the creation. He already knows what it is. So I said, how did you learn in English? He said, here. I said, you have instructors here? He said, no. I said, how do you learn it? He said, we learn all the languages we need. They have a white wall behind the temple. They just sit facing the wall meditating, and they learn what they need to know. They get all their news from the wall. They don't have a newspaper there. And he told me about world events that were going on that I would read in the newspaper later. So there are many approaches to this God phenomena, the universal intelligence that the Palladians called the creation. And I like that word better than any, because it's impersonal and undefined. Yeah, it's a matter of meditation. Here again, he's meditating in front of the white wall and turning in. Inside of you and you and you, every one of you have all the consciousness you need. You don't need to go to college. You don't need to go anywhere except to help you remember. You don't learn anything new because you already know all there is to know, right in here someplace. And you have to learn how to tap it, how to get to it. But you don't need to go elsewhere. All other people can do is help you remember what you already know. If you think you're going to school, you'll remember that. Every time they teach you something new, you say, I knew that.
Presidents.
The presidents, I'm convinced that some of our presidents have been contacted directly. I think that Eisenhower was. He refused to talk about it. And, you know, when I had my first conference in 1991, I had been following the case of Halsey, a lieutenant commander by the name of Halsey. When the war ended, he was a PT boat commander. When the war ended, the PT boats were assigned grid patterns to cruise in the Pacific until they could be returned and mustered out of the service. And he was assigned a grid pattern in the ocean just to patrol, to keep his boat and his men busy. And they were patrolling their grid pattern when they hit a solid object in mid-ocean. And the ship rode up on it above the waterline. And then the object began to emerge, and he thought it was a new island coming up, except it was smooth and metallic. He jumped overboard. His PT boat is laying over on one side a little bit. And he landed on solid ground, and then a tower came up out of the surface, and a door opened on the side, and a man came out. And motioned to him and took him by the hand, took him inside and down into it. It was a huge craft, a huge ship of some kind. He showed him around for a time and said, well, it's time for you to leave. And he took him back to the surface, and he climbed into his PT boat, and the big ship submerged, and he's floating again. So those visitors came back to him a number of times where they would send the ship to hover over the PT boat and take him aboard from his PT boat. And he developed a relationship with him, and he began telling his wife about this. And when he finally was returned to the United States and left the service, got home to Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah, where his wife lived, she wanted to meet the ETs. So he asked him on the next communication if he could bring her along, and they say, we see no problem. We consider you a unit. Go ahead and bring her. So he took her to the next rendezvous meeting, and they would meet them in remote places. The ETs would give them a rendezvous point, which would be a vegetarian restaurant or something like that in another city, and they'd drive there, go to the restaurant, and meet them. And so he was meeting him with his wife, and then he disappeared. We didn't know what happened to him. So I called his wife, Tarna, and asked her about the contacts. She said, oh, yes. She said, I met them personally. She said, I met a Venusian man and woman and also a Martian man and woman that they brought to the rendezvous. So she said, I know that there is intelligent life on both of those planets. And I said, can you come to my Congress and tell about this? She said, I would be happy to, but she said, there's more to it. She said, after President Eisenhower had his meeting with the extraterrestrials, which was only rumor at the time, that she and her husband were invited to Washington. Being a Navy commander, he was reporting his contacts directly to Naval Intelligence. So when Eisenhower got back to Washington, he went to intelligence and says, how many more contacts like this are going on? They gave him a list. So he began calling those people on his list, one by one, to the Oval Office in the White House, the United States, for a one-on-one interview quietly in the Oval Office with no other witnesses. And Tarna Halsey and her husband are sitting there, and the president is asking them a lot of questions about their contacts. And she tried to ask some questions about his, and he scowled at her, didn't answer. Finally, she said, well, Mr. President, we believe you had a contact too. Why don't you tell the American people about it? He said, my dear lady, a president can't do all that he would like to do. He said, I'm sorry. And that wasn't enough for her. So a little further on in the conversation with her husband, she interrupted again, and she said, well, when you have your fireside chat on Saturday and Friday nights, why don't you just stop in the middle of it and say, dear public, I have something, an important announcement to make, and tell them about your meeting in California. He looked at her again. He said, my dear lady, you don't understand. A president is not that free. He does not have the liberty to do whatever he would like to do. And he scowled at her again, and he turned back the conversation with her husband. So I wanted her to describe this contact in Washington to me, to my Congress. Well, after my conversation with her one day, she called me back the next morning, and she said, look, she said, I can't come to your Congress. I've had visitors. She said, people came from the FBI. They warned me that I can lose my pension. My invalid sister can lose her medical support. That we have much to lose if we go to your conference and say one word. She said, I cannot come to your conference. I can't talk to you anymore. Don't try to contact me. I won't respond. Don't write me a letter. Nothing. And so I let it quiet like that for a long time. And 10 years later, I tried to call her, and she said, I told you I just can't afford to talk to you. Goodbye. Her name was Tarna Halsey, and she was having contact with her husband directly, and they knew about Eisenhower's contact, and he wouldn't discuss it. He died never telling anybody about his contacts. But that's the contact that we're researching now, Danielle. We're trying to find out in the second day of those contacts, the indications we have now is that President Eisenhower decided he needed some ecclesiastical advice, because this is clearly beyond their angels. They're beyond anything we have here. So he sent word down to Los Angeles and brought the senior cleric, the Cardinal McIntyre, who was then the Bishop of Los Angeles, into the meeting. They flew him up in a small plane, the only airplane that was allowed to land at Merak. A newspaper reporter from the Los Angeles Times, hearing about McIntyre's leaving for Merak, chartered another airplane and tried to get to Merak to the meeting. He was turned away when he got to the base, not allowed to land there. So he landed at a nearby base, rented a taxi, and tried to go to Merak, and they turned him away at the gate, told him the base was closed. The base was closed. The base was closed for 3 days. After the ETs arrived over the runway, and the duty officer went out and met the approaching disc that was hovering at ground level, an occupant got out, said, "We want to talk to your leader." So he called the command post and said that there's somebody down here who wants to talk to the commander. And the commander arrived in his staff car, and he met them there, and they told him they wanted to meet his leader, the president of the country, for him to send word. It took him almost a day to get Washington to believe that they wanted Eisenhower to come to Merak for some reason. Finally, they got word to Palm Springs, where Eisenhower was vacationing, and they sent a helicopter down from Merak to pick him up. The helicopter landed on the lawn of the estate where Eisenhower was staying, and the mechanic got out in flight coveralls and walked to the building, went inside. A man in flight coveralls came out of the building, walked to the helicopter, and got aboard, took off, and flew away. The aides to the President Eisenhower at that time put out the word that he was ill with an infected tooth, and that he wasn't going to see anybody. They would let the public, the reporters and the public, know when he would be okay. For 3 days, they kept turning people away, telling them the same thing, that he has a badly infected tooth. Then the helicopter came back, and a man in coveralls got out, walked to the room. Another man in coveralls walked back to the helicopter, and it flew away. That was Eisenhower being returned. He had changed clothes with the mechanic on the helicopter and went to Merak aboard the helicopter. When he came back to change clothes again, and the mechanic went back on the helicopter and went to Merak. We have some evidence of that witness. We also know that when the base commander began to believe that the visitors were who they said they were, and that they were going to get a meeting with the President of the United States, the base commander ordered the base closed and everybody sent home to remain home until they were called back to work through the pyramid alerting procedure. The pyramid alerting procedure was where the command post calls 20 people, who call 10 people each, calls 10 people each, who calls 10 people each, until all the people are notified to come back to work. That's the pyramid alerting program. And so the base was closed for 3 days, and nobody came and went. The gates were closed. Nobody worked except the security people that were protecting the hangar that the ship was in, and President Eisenhower and the conferences were taking place. We have that information. We have people that were sent home for 3 days and then called back. We do not have positive evidence of what took place in the meeting, but we believe that those visitors were telling Eisenhower at the time that our mutual assured destruction policy, MAD, MAD policy, was truly a mad policy, and that it is bound to fail, that no society had ever created a super weapon that they didn't eventually use. And when you use yours, you will destroy your world. You will destroy all life on it. And they said there's another meeting taking place on the other side of the Cold War faction in the Kremlin at the same time, talking to the Russian leader on the same subject at the same time. And it was of interest to me when I learned all this, that they were telling us we have to get off from this MAD policy, which was the strategic air defense policy. And all we had was strategic forces. If we were attacked, we were going to bomb them out of existence. They're going to bomb us out of existence, and the world goes. So it was only 3 months after that alleged meeting with President Eisenhower that our Secretary of Defense announced a new policy. We're going to create tactical forces so we can fight small-scale wars without going to an atomic exchange. And we've been in that posture ever since. We have tactical forces that carry out our military operations all over the world. We have never used the strategic deterrent, except a couple of months ago we lost 5 bombs. We think that those 5 bombs were withdrawn by our government secretly, by Cheney, Vice President Cheney, because the bomb storage facilities can only be opened by a signal from Washington. 2 men with different keys and a radio signal from Washington that's simultaneous to open the locks. So Washington had to know that those bombs were being taken out. They weren't lost. There's the procedure such they can't be lost. They were hanging on a B-52 that was flying missions against Iraq. And we thought, we were convinced at the time, I mean, people like me, that we were going to secretly bomb those atomic research facilities in Iran, that a situation would be created where the Iranians would do something to the Israelis, and the Israelis would retaliate, and we have to join them, and we would bomb them out of existence. And it failed because the secrecy was broken, and the newspaper people found out about the 5 warheads hanging on a B-52 at Barksdale Air Force Base, and they couldn't do it after that because the secret is out. But we think that that plan was actually in operation until it was discovered and revealed. And we could have been in a very serious situation. Bermuda Triangle, it's mysterious. There's a lot of things mysterious there. What do I think about the Bermuda Triangle? It's a mysterious place. There are other mysterious triangles in the world also. There are some 40 ships that have disappeared without the crews have disappeared completely, which would indicate to me that some of those disappearances may have been a case where all the occupants of the ship were taken aboard a UFO and the ship allowed to float until it struck a rock and sunk. Others, there are other mysterious things. There's gravity anomalies in the Bermuda Triangle. There are vortexes in the Bermuda Triangle that may be responsible for some things. Of great interest to me was when the British Airlines lost a BOAC airliner flying through the Bermuda Triangle. It disappeared completely with everybody aboard, and nobody ever returned. So they sent out another BOAC airliner to look for the one that was missing, and it disappeared. 2 of them, one behind the other, that never came back. And we never have found those anyplace, so we don't know what happened to them. Some of the ships, when I was flying, delivering airplanes to Haiti one time, I was flying over the Bermuda Triangle. And I noticed a ring of rocks under the surface of the water where most of the time when the seas are high, you can't see them at all. But when the seas are lower, when the wind is blowing, the waves crest above the rocks, and I see a circle of white foam. And when I flew over the circle, the water is very clear in the Caribbean there. I could see ships all around that ring of rocks, sunken ships on the bottom that were just abandoned there, and they were still there. And that would account for a number of the ships that disappeared. They struck that underwater reef that is only visible under certain conditions, and probably has caused there were all kinds of ships, metal ships and wooden ships, all in the same place. But that's only one. There are many more disappeared. That doesn't account for 100 ships disappearing. There's a lot of mystery in the Bermuda Triangle, unsolved.